Hello and welcome for the first time to Inside Update, brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org, a nonprofit Connecticut newsroom working to root out corruption. We're going to be discussing some recent news stories, investigations, and other topics from around Connecticut, and we'd also like to hear from you. My name is Connor Dragotis. I'm joined today by Mark Fitch, Trisha Ennis, and Catherine Revelo to talk about 4 topics. We're going to be talking about clean election funding in Connecticut, the state spending more than $1 million per year on Viagra and generics, the ups and downs of ending horseshoe crab harvesting in the state, and a lawsuit in East Windsor that is making waves. Let's jump right in. Clean election funding. This has been something people have been talking about for a long time. Catherine, you've been working on this investigation. Can you tell us a little bit about this and also, I guess, the process? My understanding is that it was at times kind of hard to get information.
Yeah, absolutely. So our latest investigation takes a look at Connecticut's Citizens Election Program, which is a voluntary public finance program for candidates running for most statewide offices. And basically, to qualify for a CEP grant, which is a publicly funded grant, if you're running for office, you have to collect a certain number of donations from eligible residents in your district between the amount of $5 and $290. And you have to meet a certain threshold in order to receive the public funding. And so we kind of evaluated, whether the program had met its goals. It was brought about to try to get a lot of donor money out of elections and also to make running for office more accessible for a wider array of people who maybe don't necessarily have access to big money backing. And so what we found was that it's had kind of mixed results. It's not necessarily made elections more competitive. It hasn't necessarily increased the number of people running for office, but it does have a relatively high rate of participation, at least among legislative candidates, right? And to find that out, we really had to do a lot of digging into the SEEC, which manages the program's archives, because most of this information, if you want to go out there and find it, you're going to have to dig through a bunch of election results. You're going to have to dig through a bunch of candidate filings. It's not like it's just out there and easy in one quick document that you can find.
Yeah, and I just want to kick in here and say, like, poor Catherine getting saddled with this story. I remember when you were first pitching at Connor, and I was, you were talking to me about it, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, oh God, no, I don't want anything to do with this. And so I feel kind of terrible that Catherine comes on and we're like, oh, here's this giant thing for you to look at. But you did a really great job. And I think it's just my own commentary, when you mention it has a high participation rate. Well, yeah, because it's right there. It's, the candidates don't have to go out and really like hit the streets and work, donors and work, different, political action committees and all this kind of stuff. It's just, hey, here's my paperwork. And, the state essentially cut you a check as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it turned out to be, you are 100% right, Mark. When you came in, Catherine, right, we're all excited. We got a new reporter. This is going to be fantastic. And then I feel like we laid a few right on you, with the goal of helping you get it to get going and come up with ideas as you're getting used to this. And we've definitely fed you a few doozies, to the point that it's going to a part 2 as well to be released in October. Is that you came across allegations of some serious stuff, but could you tease that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to look at in part 2 is kind of exactly what Mark said is, allegations that, basically if you want public funding, you don't have to do a whole lot to get, what's basically over 50% in return. So we're going to look at some allegations that some local party committees have potentially been running candidates in elections where they don't stand a chance, just so that they can spread some money around to, insider loyalists.
That's super interesting.
I guess it kind of makes sense. Not a bad way to just taking some cash. So And, just speaking of which, when they mention that, to increase participation in Connecticut's elections, I mean, if we go back to, last year when we did that story, Keep the Seat, the money, it doesn't seem to be the barrier for getting people to participate more in elections, to get new candidates in and things like that. There's all these other ballot access issues and barriers that stand in the way. It's not all about money. And one thing I always remember is when you look at the past, gubernatorial candidates, when you had like Tom Malloy and Bob Stefanowski, how much does money actually play? Or if you go back to like Linda McMahon running for Senate, how much does money really matter? Because those were some very rich people who didn't need the citizens election program, didn't use it, and put in their own money, and they had a lot of it and still came up short. So, money matters to a point, I guess, in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the ballot access laws we found definitely played a role, especially when it comes to, minor party candidates or petitioning candidates who are trying to get grants, and it, potentially makes it a lot more difficult for them to participate in elections.
Any other thoughts on that? I know we're going to try to keep this program, I think, generally to around 30 minutes, right? We don't want this to sit and just feel like folks have to listen to us go on about a topic forever. This is a really important investigation, I think, is the last point that I wanted to make on this, and that we are definitely going to see a part 2. We'll see what comes out. Obviously, tips and other evidence of wrongdoing. Part of our mission is to root out corruption here. So anyone who's seeing stuff at the local level, reaching out to Catherine is really important. I'd like to just move to our second topic, though, which is the state spending more than $1 million per year on Viagra and generics. You can see Mark hang his head, right? And that's part of what I want to get into. The idea of, why on earth are we writing about things that we don't necessarily want to write about? Real briefly, my understanding, this is a follow-up after the Wall Street Journal pointed out that Connecticut is spending more than $30 million a year on obesity medication for state employees. Mark was kind of poking around at this, and the question came up, all right, hey, what else are we spending money on? Mark, how did that progress from there?
Well, I mean, I didn't personally have this question. I didn't think of it. It was, a colleague in the Connecticut media sphere, called me up and said, "Hey, did you see this?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw that." And he goes, "What do you think they're spending on Viagra?" And when you first hear it, you think, "Oh my God, that'd be a great story for somebody else to write and me to read."
Yep.
But then when it was like, oh, I'm gonna write this, and I start reflecting a little bit more on it. I'm like, oh God, I don't know. Do I really want to, bother the comptroller's office with this? Because, I mean, the jokes, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. I'm not big on just like, trying to throw that kind of stuff out there. And then I ended up having to do a, large amount of research into erectile dysfunction. So I'm sure my email junk box will be full of lots of really interesting emails over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, so, I went to the comptroller's office. They were really cool about everything. And I requested the information for active state employees. I did not do retirees. So when we say 1 million per year, I guarantee you it's higher, because I didn't request the retiree information. To me, I just didn't think that was all that fair. When you look at, the way ED works, as you get older, that's just going to happen. So I thought that might kind of skew things a little bit. So I was going to focus on active employees who are in the younger working age range, because, when you start looking at, nationally, the use of, the treatment for ED for workers in that range, men in that range has actually been increasing, and it's, they're seeing higher levels in younger men. And, a couple doctors that I reached out to, particularly one out of the Yale School of Medicine who specializes in this, she said she does see quite a few men under the age of 65 being treated for this. And, it kind of dovetails into the whole obesity medication thing, because that is one of the big predictors if you're going to have trouble in that area. So, I mean, I wrote it, I did it, I wasn't thrilled about it at the time, but here we are.
One thing that this story that makes me think about, it's not just like the salaciousness of the state spending money on erectile dysfunction medication. If you feel that the ability to have that kind of function is necessary, is medically necessary, you can absolutely justify the expense. Frequently, the question of like, does the insurance cover ED medication? Does the state pay for it? Does whoever pay for it? Comes up when you're comparing it to places that do not allow, people to get birth control. It's a question of, women's medical health versus men's. And I think that there's also an argument for the obesity medication. If you think that, I think the argument the state put out was, we spend this money for obesity medication because if you lower obesity rates, you also lower healthcare costs overall. So there are, different balancing acts. And I think that ultimately it's just about how much information you have.
Yeah. And also just health in general too. Mental health for people living a better quality of life. These are the people who are making policy decisions and making really important determinations that impact everyone in Connecticut. I think we want these people to live better quality, have a higher quality of life, and making sure that they have the medications or lifestyle necessary to do so. That could benefit every single person in the state.
And, one of the interesting things I came across was, Connecticut had the third highest rate of prescriptions in the country. This is back in 2018. Getting like up to date, numbers is difficult at times, but so, and, there were speculation as to, well, we have an older population, which we do. And or more openness about sexual health in general in the Northeast as compared to like down south, where their prescription rates were pretty low, with the exception of Florida, because there's a lot of older people in Florida. So
absolutely. And I know again, trying to keep to this tight timeline. This is our first rodeo doing this show, so I want to move on. One thing I wanted to mention first, just from a strategy perspective too, and, kind of peel back the curtain on the inner workings of a newsroom, is we're a new brand. Today, as we're recording this, we're 484 days old. So I think it's interesting and helpful for us to experiment with new kinds of content. I think when we see things that are, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? What's going to drive clicks? That's certainly a consideration for a growing brand. We saw a 20% increase in click traffic yesterday as a result of this article, but that can't be the only thing that we're thinking about when we're doing this, right? It's just another consideration where we want to serve human beings, not just follow some data machine. Our readers really tell us if we're doing a good job. Clicks, emails, calls, comments. I don't know. Part of making news and journalism better is innovating and trying new things. But I think we're definitely going to have to think about this because, we did catch some flack on this for, hey, why are you writing about ED? Why are you writing about Viagra? Does this really matter? I don't know. I'd be curious if Trisha, you have a thought on this too, because you come from a more established media, large TV background. Is that something that you had to deal with in different media settings?
Certainly. You always get comments of like, why is this news? Or my favorite is the first comment always being, who cares? And it's like, you do. If you're commenting on it, you care somewhat.
Yeah.
Whether you're angry about it because you don't think the news should be covering it or, or whatever. You're always going to get people that are upset. It's really just about, making a decision on what you consider newsworthy and being able to justify it somehow. I think certainly if we, dug deeper on this and found out that, Viagra is the third most prescribed drug, then that would be incredibly newsworthy. Why is that? that kind of thing. I think that, you just make a judgment call on what's newsworthy and what's not. And certainly you have to balance, as a news organization whose, livelihood does rely on people coming to the website and, in our case, donating. You have to balance what's newsworthy versus what people are interested in. You have to figure out, oh, that's interesting, and also I think people should know. And overall, this is state spending. If people want to know where their tax dollars are going, if one of those things is ED medication, they have the right to know whether or not they care.
Well, I'll just say this one last thing. I mean, with a story like this, who else was going to do it?
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're here for at times is, well, nobody else would really want to do this or actually, jump through the hoop to do it. So we did it.
Yeah. And credit to you for doing it right. I mean, you taking the time to do the research, to get multiple people to comment and understand the landscape, not just, a splashy headline and then let the clicks roll in from there too. Speaking of interesting things that other people don't seem to be covering, horseshoe crabs are next on the agenda. And Trisha, I did not know this much about horseshoe crabs. I had no idea the benefits to humanity. And I am super curious to get your thoughts and learn a little bit more about what this actually means for Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, I have a special interest in horseshoe crabs. I'm not like obsessed with them or anything, but I always saw them at the beach when I was a kid. We would go visit my grandmother on Long Island, and there were always horseshoe crabs, whether they were alive or dead. You'd always see horseshoe crabs everywhere. And for some reason, I felt like I stopped seeing them for a while. I don't think I have seen one since I was a kid. And maybe that's just the beaches I'm going to. Who knows? But it came up a couple of years ago. One of the things that I linked to in the story that we have online is an NPR story about like the weird way that we've used horseshoe crabs for medical science. And we're still doing it. So these horseshoe crabs have been around since before dinosaurs. The oldest horseshoe crab fossil we have is 445 million years old, I think. And, dinosaurs went extinct in 65 million years ago. So horseshoe crabs not only have existed for hundreds of millions of years, they also outlived everything else that's gone extinct in that time. And so that makes them kind of interesting. They're weird looking, and that's partly because they're prehistoric. And also they are incredibly resilient. And so, people in biomedical fields have found that you can use horseshoe crabs for different kinds of study. So they used it, and they've looked into horseshoe crabs' eyesight and things like that to learn about like ocular sutures for eye surgeries. They also used portions of the horseshoe crab, I think still in the eye portion, to invent new bandages for burn victims that are more helpful. And then the main thing that they do even today is they use the blood of horseshoe crabs to test vaccine batches for bacteria. So before they distribute vaccines, they test the batches on horseshoe crab blood, which reacts with bacteria, so they can tell if a batch is contaminated. And we're still harvesting blood from thousands of horseshoe crabs every year.
I gotta say, I was shocked when you rambled all this off to me the other day, because that was my first question. I'm like, what do you freaking want the horseshoe crabs for? I mean, I used to step over them on the beach,
Yeah.
Like this ugly, weird shell thing. Yeah, but yeah,
it is an ugly, weird shell thing with 10 eyes.
I didn't even know it had eyes. I just thought it had that long, I don't know, is it a nose, a tail? I don't know what the hell that thing is, but yeah, no, I was shocked. I didn't realize they were such a hot biomedical commodity.
Yeah, they're a big biomedical commodity, but they're also important to the environment, the ecosystem. The Connecticut Audubon Society talks about how important they are to certain types of migratory birds who eat their eggs. And if there are no horseshoe crabs, there are no eggs, and the birds might not be able to migrate. They also house like an entire ecosystem of like microorganisms on their bodies that could die if we no longer have horseshoe crabs. So this ban is now going into effect where you can no longer harvest horseshoe crabs in Connecticut because the population has been decreasing so much. And that's not actually as a result of the biomedical field. Only about 15% of horseshoe crabs that are harvested and like bled actually die during the process. Most of them are released back into the wild, and they do mark them so that they don't like do worse, basically. But they are heavily fished by commercial fishermen but not people who fish for horseshoe crabs. They're caught and then like chopped up and then used as bait for eel and whelk. So if you're fishing for those, you use horseshoe crabs as bait. So thousands of them die every year as a result of commercial fishing.
Oh,
And Trisha, my understanding with this law, right, is that it's not, you can, if you're doing medical research or some sort of other educational research, you can still get a permit from the state too. So those purposes, you can still harvest horseshoe crabs, right? This is specifically targeted at.
Yeah, the concern was always fishermen. So the state had a restriction on fishing, like on harvesting horseshoe crabs for fishing, that you could only do it during certain months. But they've since now with this new ban, which goes into effect on October 1st, you can no longer harvest horseshoe crabs for that purpose at all. Yeah, you can get, special dispensation from the state to do like medical research, which is beneficial and doesn't kill that many, but they're worried about like over harvesting and just outright killing them, which is what a lot of commercial fishing does. And there are other states that are also considering horseshoe crab bans, and Connecticut is trying to like lead the way.
Is it also, I mean, that's great. I'm actually glad to hear that there's an exception. Is it already currently permitted for health research? So you already had to have that? Like there isn't an additional barrier now to this important medical research?
I honestly do not know. There is a group in Connecticut that specifically tracks and like researches horseshoe crabs. They've been in existence for a very long time. They're out of Sacred Heart University. I was planning on talking to one of their main researchers. Unfortunately, we weren't able to work out a time to really discuss like the benefits and the pros and cons essentially of this ban. So I'm not 100% positive whether or not there is a new hurdle for those folks, if it's a different kind of permitting process, if they have to really worry. There are also other states where they can go that don't have bans. So I don't know how much or if at all this is going to affect the biomedical community. I suppose we will see. And possibly that's a follow-up story.
That's great. Those are my favorite kind of stories, the ones that lead to more content. That's great.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. If there's anything else on the horseshoe crabs, I was so glad that you brought that to the table. That was such a cool find.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything else to discuss on the horseshoe crab front. I think they're fascinating. I think if you don't know anything about horseshoe crabs, you should totally look into it. Go read the story on our website. Look at the links that I included in that, especially the NPR story. It's really, really interesting. I guess the only fun fact is that horseshoe crab's blood is bright blue.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. That's awesome. Let's move on then to our fourth and final topic, which is a lawsuit in East Windsor. So, Mark, you wrote an article about this. I'm not even going to do an upfront brief explanation. I'm hoping that you can do that because this is a second article for you about what's going on in East Windsor, correct?
I think the first article was done by Tom a while back.
Okay.
But yeah, basically a lawsuit was filed by a former public works employee by the name of William Mercy. And when I saw the post about it, his name rung a bell. Now he's filing a lawsuit because the town terminated his employment while he was facing a health issue for which he had doctor's notes and all this kind of stuff, and he was going to take some time away and then come back supposedly, full steam ahead. And they terminated him. And that was in July of 2021. Well, in May of 2021, CII got a hold of an internal town investigation through a Freedom of Information request. And this investigation was sparked by William Mercy. He was alleging sexual harassment essentially at the workplace after some of the public works employees found a bag of sex toys on the side of the road. But the investigation spiraled off into a lot of other areas, including some really racist things that were going on, allegations of corruption by officials within the Department of the Public Works Department there. And there was this, it was quite a long write-up, and we were the ones who broke that story, and there were follow-up stories in other outlets, and ultimately nothing really seemed to come of that investigation. They're like, oh, we're going to send people for more sensitivity training, as you do, but the things that were actually happening in the public works department. And we had, just that same year, we had done the story about, racism allegations at the Connecticut Department of Transportation,
Right.
which ended up being a big story. And so, like, you keep getting all these public works and DOT stories involving this stuff. And I'm like, what's going on, people? Like, it's not really how you're supposed to treat one another. So when I saw that, he had filed this lawsuit over being terminated, I was like, this ties into, something else that was going on at the time. And these were kind of running concurrently. So I thought it was interesting enough that it, should write it up, link back to our original piece, so people kind of see how he fits into that whole issue there in the town. And and Mercy himself was named in some of the allegations, just making somebody uncomfortable or something like that. So no real heroes in this, but it was an interesting look at some things that are going on in East Windsor. And it's only a snippet because I get a lot of messages from East Windsor. There are some goings on that some people aren't very happy about.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I'll say that one of the heroes in the story is you for jumping in and doing reporting on smaller towns. Listen, I mean, I know it's a little bit of like a dramatic phrasing, but I'm just jumping off of what you said. This is part of, I think, one of the things that we really want to make sure is happening in Connecticut. I mean, Connecticut's lost 50% of their newsroom since 2004. That's a huge problem. Whether it's East Windsor or any of the towns across Connecticut, I think we definitely want to be hearing from people about what's going on in your city hall, what's going on in your neighborhood. Those tips are really valuable. Of course, this one is particularly mind-blowing now in multiple iterations, but we want to spend the time investing in the communities and making sure that those stories get told. Because as you said before, if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? It's important work.
But it's also tough because there's 169 towns, and that's 169, town meetings and finance committee meetings and all this like local stuff going on. So it's like, you can't just like throw a dart and hit a town and go charging in to, see what's happening. So, I mean, that's why we have a tip line. That's why people, have our emails and our phone numbers and things like that. So, if there is something going on in that town, bring us something good. It's a lot of times you get like a lot of little things, but like we need the big one. So
absolutely. On that topic, Mark talking about a couple different ways to get in touch with him. Trisha, Catherine, same for you two, I assume. But are there other ways that you like to hear from people?
Oh, reaching out on. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
know. We both started talking at the same time. I mean, reaching out anywhere, honestly. I'm on all of the social medias except I think Mastodon and some of the other ones, the smaller ones. But like Twitter, Threads, Instagram, Facebook. I'm on Blue Sky now. Haven't really used it very much. But yeah, any of those places you can reach out and with tips. Also email. We also have, if you have a sensitive tip, we have encrypted email. Also on our bios on the website. So you just go to insideinvestigator.org and check it out.
Absolutely. Catherine, did you have others to add to that?
Nope, Trisha pretty much perfectly encapsulated what I was going to say.
That's awesome.
We should just trade off like every word.
Yeah,
exactly. That's really
exactly.
on me for posing a question to both of you at the same time. So we'll get better in future episodes.
We'll blame you, Connor. It's your fault.
I get it.
We'll
hey, that's part of the job. Yeah. Any closing thoughts here? Anything else that we need to talk about around Connecticut this week?
I think the only other thing I would add is I had a story yesterday about a state audit into Yukon, which had a bunch of findings, not only where they've broken state law in a couple of places, but also their own bylaws in some places. And many of those are repeat offenses from the previous audit. So go to insideinvestigator.org and check that out for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that dovetails nicely with the story that came out just a few days ago showing that Yukon's spending has risen incredibly faster than its student population. So they're spending a lot of money. They don't have the student population to show for it. So it's this is where your money goes.
Absolutely. Thank you for everyone who's watching this. We really appreciate it. This is a new endeavor for us. And as Catherine alluded to, the 4 topics that we had on the list for today, they're just a fraction of what is available at insideinvestigator.org. You can also sign up for our free emails there. We send those out Wednesday and Sunday mornings with all of our headlines. And as I said at the beginning of this, we'd really like to hear from you. Part of what we do is engage with the community. We want to learn. We want to, how do we get better as a journalism outlet with the mission of serving the people of Connecticut? One of the best ways to get your questions answered and your comments heard live on this program is to become a donor of our nonprofit newsroom. That's a tax-deductible donation. So for as little as $5 per month, you can get access to a community of other people who care about Connecticut. You can get access to discounted merch, free stickers, some other fun stuff. And also, starting with the next episode, you'll be able to be with us live in this Zoom event where you can pose questions to our reporters, throw comments out there, and again, all of this live as we discuss what's going on in Connecticut. You can visit insideinvestigator.org/donate to get access to that. Thank you again to everyone watching. Thank you, Mark, Tricia, and Catherine, for joining today. Thank you for watching Inside Update. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.